He mounted winding stone stairs and at last came out on the roof of his castle Miir, high above the river Derna. In the west, the sun hung close to old earth. Ruby shafts, heavy and rich as wine, slanted past the gnarled boles of the archaic forest. Greetings, viewers, and welcome to another episode of Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and with my teammates Nikki Zuef and XJ, we will be discussing one of Jack Vance's far future fantasy tales. It's the first of 6 adventures with a common setting published together in 1950 in Vance's collection The Dying Earth. In a previous podcast, we discussed the last of these, Guile of Sphere. Now we shall focus on the opening story, Turjan of Miir. It's a short, densely written gem of a tale in which the reader is treated to an eventful episode in the life of the sorcerer Turjan, who is trying to create life in vats. He's getting nowhere. His creatures are malformed and imbecilic, and he decides to seek a mysterious being called Pandelume, of far greater knowledge than his own, who lives in an undefined location called Embyleon, which seems to be a place not of Earth, bounded by a mysterious dark curtain instead of a horizon. Pandelume will insist on Turjan doing him a favour in return for the knowledge he seeks, and this commitment involves Turjan in further adventure. The Dying Earth is a world saturated with magic, which has replaced science and technology as a source of power. Magic is a purely practical art and has its limitations. Turjan can only fit 4 spells in his head at one time. Details like this enable Vance to achieve a paradoxical realism, which is further emphasized by his powerful prose, sometimes lavish in its rococo detail, and sometimes, on the contrary, using a few hauntingly suggestive words to do the work of many in hinting at further richness. To characterize the haunting mood Vance evokes, I could adapt the phrase fin de siècle into fin de monde, so that the connotations of an approaching end are expanded from a merely cultural context to the end of the world itself, which is felt by Earth's inhabitants to be close at hand, as the sun is nearing the end of its life. One final remark to illustrate the amazing feat of compression achieved by the author in Turjan of Miir. In the 2 artificially created women, Tsane and Sace, with their different minds and their similar physical beauty, and the tension between them would amply provide for an entire story. Yet we are given all that in addition to Turjan's perilous mission in the decadent city Cain, and his subsequent arrival back in Embyleon in time to rescue Pandelume from an unexpected disaster, all in 14 pages. Right, I'll ask our youngest member, Comrade Zuef, to give his thoughts on this story, first of all.
Today I'm in my Miami edition of Where, as you can see. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me the word, Robert. I mean, this is certainly an interesting case as when it comes to a short story. I won't say I didn't enjoy it. I also won't say that I was completely thrilled by it. It was something in the middle, where there were parts of it that seemed exciting and interesting. There's this great Leonardo DiCaprio caption, a meme, where he, starts clicking his fingers and he's pointing towards the TV. He's like, "Oh, here it's coming," and that's the way I felt when I saw how the magic worked in this short story. Because for those of you who don't know, Vancian magic is basically the same way magic works in most role-playing games, including Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of stuff. So it was interesting to see the origin of how that whole thing is written and the idea of you forgetting the spells. That was cool to see from that perspective. As far as the contents of the story itself, I'll repeat what I said last time. I really don't understand how anyone could call this fantasy and have like an in-depth discussion whether or not this is fantasy or science fiction. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we have a new term for this type of fiction, and it's called post-apocalypse, right? So this is what this clearly is. But as to if it's more fantasy or sci-fi, I mean, come on, it's sci-fi. Everything can be quote unquote explained by some sort of evolutionary step or scientific invention, which the people are using. I mean, the whole idea about cloning people and so on and so forth, a very not executed in a very fantasy way, put it like that. Where was I? Oh yes, I mean, as far as the plot itself, it's interesting to see where the character is going. I got some sinister undertones about him at the end of the story from the idea that he might be in some way, shape, or form controlling one of the twins. But I think that was just me adding more to the bone than there really was with my own mind. Yeah, I mean, it's it has a lot of interesting aspects about it. It's one of those stories that I think that one could come back to as a writer and just take one of the many concepts within it and write a whole short story about that. But instead, Jack Vance has created a hodgepodge of all the ideas that he had and put it into 14 pages. Um, and this may be controversial, but I think if he wanted to explore all those concepts, he should have either written multiple stories or did more with the concepts within this one, and therefore make the story itself longer. Because the flash of all these things happening was a little bit too fast for me, I guess. And too fast, not in the sense that like I didn't understand what was going on, but more like the pacing itself was too quick for me to be uh, too invested in what was going on. Because page 3 something's going on, but by page 4 we're already forgotten it because now we're somewhere else. Okay, fine, whatever. Yeah, so it's and at the same time, I also don't say I didn't enjoy it. It's more like there were a lot of hiccups along the way for me to, at the end of the day, say that was okay. Yeah, there you go. That's kind of my uh, unfiltered thoughts for the moment. Actually, if you could.
Yes. I read The Dying Earth a while back, and I have returned to this short story for this podcast. And like Nikki, I was immersed in Dungeons and Dragons before I ever read The Dying Earth, and it was a bit of a it's like going through like a archaeological dig site, literary wise, going through Turjan of Miir, because like Nikki, I could see all of the influences that Jack Vance had, that came down to that was passed down to how D&D structured their magic systems, and it's Jack Vance is such a huge influence that they even call it Vancian magic, like his name was used to describe the system. So that really describes how important his influence is in Dungeons and Dragons. And if any of our readers actually read the story and they also play tabletop games, there are some things that are named that D&D has that are ripped right out of the of just this story, Turjan of Miir. The excellent prismatic spray, for instance, that is a literal spell in D&D. The way the cloning works is very reminiscent of another spell in D&D. I think it's Simulacrum, if I remember correctly, but it depends on which edition of D&D you actually play. And even in Goyal's Sphere, there are certain artifacts and items that has you could say they are the ancestral form of whatever came to be in later on in D&D tabletop gameplay, the source books and all of that. And so as a archaeological curiosity, it was a fine read for me, just to trace the roots of this little niche that I've always immersed myself in, even though I don't actually play tabletop all that often, just because of how things came to be in where I grew up. But anyway, with regards to the story itself, it has this very frenetic. I get this very frenetic pacing where everything, like a lot of things, are just happening the whole time. We start with Turjan of Miir, thinking about just going over all his failures, and then immediately we're taken to Pandelume. We're taken to him traveling to Pandelume. He met Saint's sister, I think, and then he talked to Pandelume, and then he went to the city of Cain. He did battle with the guy he was supposed to take the amulet away from. Immediately he jumps back to where Pandelume is, and then very quickly we are taken several months further along, where he created his own clone, and then he made a second clone, and then he rides off into the sunset with the clone. And that bit was a little bit like that part struck me as really funny, because it's such a nerd thing. I can't find a girlfriend in real life, so I'll create one. Aside from that, besides that, I rather enjoyed the world building Jack Vance had created, which has always been the draw for me for stories like this, which is I think like the dimension, I don't know where, like Rob, the place where Pandelume has his laboratory in, is never really explained. We don't really know where it is in relation to old Earth, and but all of it is very well realized for such a short amount of time that we were given attention to it. And the city had a very what's that? I'm trying to remember. Moss ice. No, what is that? Can anyone help me out here? I'm having a bit of a brain freeze moment. The place where the Star Wars city where they had the Mos Eisley.
Tatooine.
Tatooine, yes, that planet, like that place where Obi-Wan Kenobi went to meet went to find a ride off Tatooine with Luke, and then they got to meet Han Solo, and then they flew off in the Millennium Falcon. Like, the city really had that hive of villainy and scumbags feel to it, and I feel like it would have been it's a bit unfortunate that we only had like a couple of pages of that city, and it was not developed further. It would have been really fascinating to dive deeper into that city. And yeah, I think like there are a few things that I did not enjoy about the story, which is how how like we are introduced to Pandelume, and then we are introduced to what's the name of the guy that Turjan was sent to take the amulet from?
Candive the Golden.
Candive the Golden. And we don't know anything else about those guys. I think that's the second Turjan story, if I'm not mistaken.
In a later story, Ulandor,
Yeah.
you see Kain.
Yeah. So, but within this story itself, they are not really explored, and that really is my issue, if I have any, with the Dying Earth stories, which is that some of the characters we don't get to see again until very much later in other stories, and when I got to those, I've already forgotten what they were, who they were, and where they were introduced. That was primarily I'm talking about the series as a whole. So if I have any complaints about the story, that would be it. But I have to say, I don't really read the story for continuation of the characters. I think I just read them for the sights, the ideas, and the concepts that Jack Vance laid down. And I think in those days, it was taking into context like the time it was written, and the influence it later has on so many things that followed after. To me, it was quite I can call it groundbreaking. Yeah, those are my thoughts. And what about you, Rob? What do you think?
I think both you and Nikki are making a point about the way one is forced to flash through the story with a multitude of themes and characters that don't get as much attention as you'd like. Now, I would say that's not a defect of the story, because it's part of, in a way, it itself is part of the message, and that you're journeying through a lot of shifting perspectives, and if you want to survive in that world, you have to learn to have a sort of acceptance reflex that works quite fast. And I think it's effectively done, very effectively done. It's like, I know, and it's like swimming, I suppose. I can't swim actually, but I can imagine that you don't think too much about what you're doing, you just do it, and thereby you stay afloat. And you survive in the dying earth, which is a place where things are just thrown at you and you have to field them as best you can. I think Vance succeeds 100% in this idea, and he's brilliantly inventive. I would say that he reminds me of the best of Clark Ashton Smith in a way. They're both I tend to bracket them together in they both write, when they do write about the far future of Earth, they invite comparisons with each other. The Zothic stories of Clark Ashton Smith, like Zethra, for example, and the Vance Dying Earth stories, they're both lavishly detailed and written in gorgeous language. I think Smith perhaps relies more on stock characters, kings and emperors and magicians and so on. Vance does those as well, but Vance also does stuff that just doesn't get repeated elsewhere. I suppose Smith does as well, though perhaps not in the stories we've discussed so far on the podcast. So anyway, they invite comparison, and to me that's a big compliment to both of them.
I do have to say that whatever else, Jack Vance does manage to paint this really wonderful atmosphere of a dying Earth. There is a really a sense of crumbling empires, old and bloated civilizations that had forgotten a lot of its past, and is wallowing in decadence and really going nowhere. It really, Jack Vance really captures that sense of stagnation and waiting for and a sense of just waiting for inevitable doom, inevitable end. I would say, not doom. It was like a very slow. You do feel, reading through the stories, you do feel this very long drawn out decline. And we know that after centuries, after a few more thousand years, the trajectory of the old Earth is just going into a slow death, and I think like that sense of disintegration, slow decay, is very well carried. For like the first story in the whole book, like the first in the collection, it really sets that tone wonderfully well. And that is the thing that I enjoyed the most about Turjan of Miir, which is the atmosphere and the world building.
The other issue to discuss, I suppose, is the point Nikki brought up at the beginning, was it's not fantasy, it's post-apocalyptic science fiction. I think that as far as atmosphere is concerned, it would never occur to me to look at it in those terms, although I can see that if you use sufficient ingenuity, you can make a case for it. But I think that if you take it literally, is the way it's represented, if you listen to what Vance is saying and assume he means what he says, I don't think it's necessary to see it in science fictional terms at all. I think the spirit is fantasy, even though you can argue the issue.
What made you think it was more science fiction, Nikki, if that is what you thought?
I mean, for me, ultimately, right, the older I'm getting, the more I'm like science fiction, fantasy, post-apocalypse, modern day, whatever. It really doesn't matter. For me, the center of any story is the characters. What are they going through? Can I relate? Can I understand? Do I feel anything? Whatever dressing it has ultimately doesn't matter. Even in
Yeah.
a story which has been adapted by Netflix, I haven't seen it, to be honest. I've only read part of the book, The Three Body Problem. That book, I mean, that series of books, they spend a long time talking about the scientific understanding of how everything works in that universe, which is enjoyable. But that's not the main part of it, right? Like, the main conflict isn't people sitting in a room discussing how cool their universe is. The conflict is about people and people making choices, right? So at a certain point, yes. Do you want to say something, Akshay?
Yeah, just want to point out that the author of the Three Body series, Three Body
Uh-huh.
Problem, well, um, his inspiration, if you can call it that, are people like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, who are more
Mm-hmm.
concerned with big ideas than they actually are with characters. So he's not a character-driven writer, and his main concern is his main the main thing he's trying to do with his story is to outline the his dark forest idea.
Yeah, for sure. But still, things happen in the story not because the universe is cool, but because people make choices in the story, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you're gonna call this dying Earth. You're gonna call it fantasy. You're gonna call it science fiction. It's not gonna change the primarily um, shift of the protagonist of what he wants to do from page 1 to page 14. The dressing of the setting, the universe of the setting doesn't matter when it comes to character development, right? It could be any story, and it could be good character development or it could be bad character development. A good writer, a great writer, uses the universe around him to influence the character, to make their character development different. But uh, an okay writer makes a really cool universe, but doesn't really do anything with the character. And Jack Vance is an amazing writer, but in this short story, I didn't feel anything towards the characters. Unfortunately, they kind of felt very bland, without a purpose. Um, Even though there are purposes that are stated, yeah, I understand. We don't have to like argue about that. Um, I know there are words on the page which tell us what these people want, but I don't know. It just a lot of the changes in people also felt sudden and strange. But um, I guess what I'm trying to say is um, you can call it what you want, Robert. It could be science fiction, it could be fantasy, it could be post-apocalypse. If you really want to get into that discussion, we can. But I think the important part is that what did we get out of this story? And for you, it was the world building, it was the way the phrases were turned within the tale, right? You were amazed by the craftsmanship and by the world building. Um, but as we know, I am a different animal, and I require drama. I require things happening. I require people to be believable and interesting with their own goals and twists and turns, and so on and so forth. And that was a little too little of that.
Well, I'm sort of coming round to your way of thinking, Nikki, as far as the fact that it doesn't matter whether it's fantasy or science fiction. I think it probably, what you say applies best to this kind of setting, end of the world, far future setting, because it's occurred to me that maybe when so much time has elapsed, there might be an actual real life convergence of magic, whatever that may be, and science. I personally regard magic as basically the idea that the map can be the territory. That is to say, symbols can have a feedback effect on reality, which is the opposite way round from the scientific view. To me, that magic has got to mean something like something as profound as that. Otherwise, it's just like the rather silly Arthur C. Clarke dictum that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think he's missing the point there completely. So, yes, it doesn't matter in this kind of story. There are science fiction stories not set in the far future, which would be utterly spoiled by the intrusion of a fantasy element. Arthur C. Clarke's own books, the best of them, like The Sands of Mars or Earthlight, if there's suddenly a magician appeared in one of those, it would wreck the book. But yes, I think that's a good point as far as the very, very far future is concerned. Science and magic may converge, and for that matter, religion and science may converge. You wouldn't want them to converge now because people can't be trusted to handle that kind of idea. And so I just wonder. I find it difficult to understand, though, why you think there's not enough drama in the story. I don't know how you.
Well, because we don't spend enough time with the drama. We don't really understand, understand the might of that. What best to call it? This antagonist that our character is going up against. I mean, he's done with in basically a flash. It doesn't really seem to be like that was that much of a difficulty.
What you're saying then is that people shouldn't write stories that are only 14 pages long, because
no, I think they should. I just think they should pick the way they write it more carefully. And do it in a way where you're not taking ideas for a 50-page story and putting it into 14 without properly configurating the idea that you have these many things happening, but you don't spend enough time on each of them in order for it to be impactful. That is my gripe.
I mean, one thing I do feel about the compression, to borrow your term, Rob, is the thing is, do we ever know why Turjan of Miir wanted to create life?
No, we don't.
No, I think that is for me anyway. That is I wouldn't say it's a huge part of the problem, but it contributes a lot to feeling disconnected with the characters. Turjan of Miir, anyway. Like, I don't know why Turjan of Miir wants to create life. I don't know.
Well, I don't know why people want to play golf, or I don't know a lot of things.
I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, but you don't have to read about the people who want to go play golf, Robert.
I mean, like I said, the characterization part of the story is not a. I mean, it's missing for me, but it's not something that would put me off reading The Dying Earth, because what I take from it is the world building and the big ideas and the big concepts that Jack Vance had.
I agree with XJ completely. I think if my goals were different, if I was thinking, I'm going to run a new Dungeons and Dragons game, or I need some inspiration, something to get me started of thinking of my own story, novel, whatever, or board game that I'm about to design, something to inspire me. Jack Vance's Dying Earth, damn, yeah, there's so much stuff. I mean, the previous story that we
Goyal of
looked at.
Sphere.
That's right, Galosphere. That had so many concepts, and it was fun to have them keep coming up to our character because we spent enough time with each of the concepts to really get into it.
It was a much longer story.
That is correct. You know, and here, if I was pursuing that kind of a goal, that kind of an aspiration, yeah, this would be a really good start. As just to read this and just think about like, well, oh, there's like this clone, and there's like a girl, like one of them is a good person, one of them is a bad person. I think I could take that and make a whole short story about that. Okay, whatever. But I had a popcorn bucket in my right hand and a big 2-liter cola in my left hand. And I sat down and I went, all right, what are we going to have today? And then it was just like, in the time of the ages, there was a time after time. Like, okay, cool. And then a bunch of stuff happened. The end. I hope you enjoyed. All right. It felt like a chapter in a history book that I read for 7th grade, and there was a lot of cool and useful information about it, but it wouldn't be something that I would read to, have a great pastime.
Yeah. That was a very beautiful description. Thank you. I mean,
was I too harsh?
No, it was very colorful. It was very enjoyable. I had a laugh. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, go on.
As much as I enjoyed the Dying Earth for the concepts, but the criticism about the character is the lack of characterization is quite valid. I do think, especially since we did read also Goyal of Sphere, and Goyal of Sphere had more characterization than Turjan of Miir, I think. Like at least we know why Goyal of Sphere is on his journey. Like he was basically thrown up by his dad. And we know why he has that insatiable drive to ask questions and to find out why. But Turjan of Miir is it's a bit of an enigma. We don't know what he's about, what his goals are. He just happens to be there doing something, and there isn't a lot of expansion to connect to him as a character, and I do see how for people who are character driven, who likes reading about characters rather than big concepts and ideas, that they might find that off-putting. And that is also a criticism of the Three Body Problem series.
Well, I think it actually has pretty good characters at the very least, like that.
Are you talking about? Are you talking about the Dying Earth or Three Body?
Three Body Problem.
Are you talking about the Netflix?
In the first...
No,
I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the book.
Oh, perhaps, but I mean, maybe it's the difference between the versions, because I am assuming you read the translation, the English translation.
Yeah, I read. Yeah, I read it in Russian. Yeah.
Oh, you read it in Russian?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I read it in the Chinese version.
In the original Chinese, yeah.
Yeah, and I think from what I've read, the English translator did a lot of work to the English translation. Let's put it that way. But when I was reading the original versions, the characters are like cardboards. They're just there to say stuff and to get us from point A to point B. It's like a bit of going on a tour. They're more like tour guides than they are actual characters, if you know what I'm trying to get at. You know,
I don't know. I think the whole thing with the father being beaten by the red gods and how that influences the character has way more character development than the entirety of this 14
That's
page story.
true. I have to say that is true. But then again, the Three Body Problem had 3 novels to build and expand upon all this stuff.
Right, but I'm just talking about that single scene. Like, you could just say, like, okay, just read this scene and then read this and compare to me which one has more character development, and I'll say left is better than the right.
Sure. Nevertheless,
That's all I'm.
the lack of characterization is a common criticism of the Three Body Problem.
Just because it's common doesn't mean it's right. So
Fair enough.
So I'm not advocating for the Three Body Problem. It does have characters who are just there to tell you information, but you know what other works of fiction have that? Shakespeare. Like every story that you can think of, there's at least one character in there who was just like the author being like, I need the audience to know this, so this guy's gonna tell them. It happens, and the less of a master you are, the worse you are at hiding. That's what's really
fair
happening.
enough. Every game needs an NPC.
That's right. And not every NPC is good. That's non-player character.
I think cardboard characters are true to life, because every day I go to the local Tesco store and I buy, some bananas or whatever. And the people who sell them to me are mostly cardboard characters. I don't know, don't know anything about them really. Tell me.
Have you ever thought of maybe asking, these cardboard people, as you said? Oh my boy. Robert, this must
That's
be the
amazing.
funniest thing you've done. Very dark. I approve. Okay. I'm gonna put my cards on the table. Turjan of Miir gets a 6.5 out of 10 from me, and it is literally being pulled from anything lower because of the depth and the the interest that the world building creates, and the mastercraft of Jack Vance, and also of the fact that there are 2 hot clones that look exactly the same. I will not elaborate. 6.5 out of 10.
Well, all right. Well, who can argue with 2 hot clones, right?
Listen, it's in the story, all right? I didn't come up with this out of thin air. It's described like that. And it's very much implied that Turjan of Miir is going to live with those 2 individuals. Anyway, Robert Gibson, what do you give Turjan of Miir?
Oh, definitely 10 out of 10. I couldn't imagine it being any better than it is in the space available. And I think there is a place in literature for stories that are compressed to this extent. It doesn't bother me. In fact, I admire it.
Awesome.
Actually, what about you?
Oh, I give it a 8 out of 10.
I have the lowest score. Wow.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've always been more of a world building guy.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I like I like places that are fantastic and exotic, and I like to me the world itself is a character, and I appreciate authors that spend time on that character rather than the human characters. Yeah. So 8 out of 10 for me. It would have been better if Turjan of Miir had a little bit more to him, that I suddenly decide one day to want to create life. It would have been a little bit better to know why Pandelume doesn't want anyone to see him. It would have been better to know who exactly is Candif the Golden, although we will...
Best not to know.
No?
Best not to know, says Robert. As if you've seen 100 years and 100 summers go by knowing it's not.
Well, you know, to each his own, right? To me, it would have been better if some of these characters were explored further. Maybe not Candif the Golden or Pandelume, but at least Turjan of Miir, because his name is on the story, you know.
That's right.
Like it's like for like Pandelume and Candif the Golden, they do come up in later stories, and we do get to know a little bit more of them, so that's fine. But Turjan of Miir, his name is on the story, man. I think we do deserve to know a little bit more about him. But again, for me, it's that is the reason why it's not higher than 8, basically. But I'd
just like to add one little point for everybody, both the people on the podcast and the viewers. It's not a competition between, at least in my head, it's not a competition between world building and character development. I think the best stories, the best books have both in in plenty of supply. So it's not about sacrificing between the two. It's making sure that the world building supports your characters, characters support the world building. And then you could have the cake and eat it too. So at least that's in my head. I don't see it as like, well, I need...
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful way of putting it.
Anyway.
Yeah. The world supports the characters, and the characters make the world feel lived in. Nice.
So you've got to have a hobby. You've got to have a hobby, and if your hobby is creating creatures in vats, then that's all there is.
Robert speaking from experience here, obviously.
Whoa, this is a pretty dark episode. We have cardboard people in real life and 2 hot clones and...
You definitely will like the Fallout series, I have to say.
All right.
Episode 6, I think. Anyway.
All right. I guess that wraps up Turjan of Miir from Jack Vance of the Dying Earth.
Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Yes. Like and subscribe and all of that. Bye-bye.